I'm Cole Haddon, and this is 5 a.m. Real Talk, a 5 a.m. StoryTalk plog. Welcome back, Story Talkers. It's been a couple of weeks. I hope the apocalypse is treating you well wherever you are in this great big world. I'm doing well myself, I think, better than I have for a while, which might have something to do with this great breakfast conversation I had with a rock star yesterday, the chat I had with my therapist today, and the TV pilot I'm neck deep in at the moment. That pilot had been throwing up roadblocks as I worked on it, but I finally got past them using a trick that might help you if you're finding yourself similarly stymied by page one. I'll come back to that later. Right now, I want to tell you about my breakfast and something my therapist said to me that it really blew my mind. Both are related, as they're about how important connection is in the arts, both between artists and between the artists and those we care about. As for the breakfast, which involved this absurdly delicious ham, pickle, and cheese toasty, I met up with someone I've known digitally for a few years now, but has become a new friend. Tim Rogers, lead singer of the band YouAmI, amongst numerous other collaborations and wonderful solo work. When my novel, Psalms for the End of the World, was released here in Australia, I found this message in my Facebook inbox from someone I assumed was this guy, Tim Rogers, I used to know. Tim seemed to really love my book and he wanted me to know it. Flattering, right? Well, a few weeks later, I realized Tim wasn't Tim Rogers from way back, but was in fact the rock star whose music I fell in love with when I first moved to Australia for uni 20 years earlier. He even ended up on ABC Radio here singing Psalm's praises, which just really blew my mind. The two of us stayed in touch, and earlier this year, I ended up moving to a town not far from where he's now living. I reached out, suggesting we get coffee, not dissimilar from him reaching out, about my book, both being attempts to connect with someone, doing something, making something we loved. So we ended up spending more than 2 hours together yesterday, just talking about things like literature, the decline of the music and publishing industries, French cinema, and that weird undercurrent of aggressive friendliness that can scare the shit out of you here in Australia. Most importantly, we talked about art with a kind of freewheeling lack of agenda that reminded me yet again how much I need regular, weekly contact with brilliant artists who are, struggling as much as I am to create something meaningful in the 21st century. If you read the 5 a.m. Story Talk newsletter, then you know how much of an advocate I am for this kind of artist camaraderie rather than the networking that can often be the norm in the arts, especially someplace like Hollywood. Not just with people working in the same medium as you are, but in all mediums, like music in Tim's case. Artists, we're a unique species, and what we talk about with each other inevitably challenges us and inspires us in unexpected ways that chatting with Chad, the banker, or Louisa, the teacher, typically won't. So if you're an artist, I want you to look around you right now. Are there artists in your life? And if not, get to work building a network of them. It'll make a huge difference to what you create, not to mention your mental health. As for Tim, he knows some of what I've been dealing with in my life for a while now, personal stuff, and he said I should at least know I looked well rested and happy enough. But I told him that was because I was flying high from being able to sit down with him. Artists keep artists sane. That's my point. So the other thing I alluded to a moment ago is this thing my therapist said to me. We were talking about what brings my life meaning, not what makes me happy, what gives it meaning. And I talked about art and travel, but I prefaced it with this confusion that I didn't say family or friends, despite how much they clearly mean to me. After we interrogated this for a bit, he pointed out that art and travel, for me at least, are deeply communal events. They're about connections. It's why I describe cinema, in particular, as a religious experience for me. Religion requires a congregation. A movie theater is filled with congregants. A museum is filled with congregants too, to something bigger than themselves. Playhouses, opera houses, even books and TV, when enjoyed alone, inevitably connect you with others, both through the stories, but also audiences who now have shared memories with you. This chat with my therapist helped me understand that art is about connection with my family and friends. It's why so many of my favorite memories involve art and the people I love, I think. Hell, 5 a.m. Story Talk is named after those late night, early morning conversations I'd have with friends about art. A little drunk, maybe a little hungover already, debating the films, the music, the books that we loved or hated at that point in our lives. This chat with my therapist, it also helped me better understand what I'm doing here at 5 a.m. Story Talk. I'm not creating content, which is a gross term. I prefer culture creator anyway, as pretentious as that sounds, but it's true because the discourse about art, about our culture, is critical to our ability to understand media, to understand our world, to understand each other. That's what this podcast is about, connecting through art. And that's a big, messy tent of a description to create something under. Yeah, sure, I get that. But the idea of defining myself by some niche, putting myself in some easily brandable box, appalls me and how I think about what I do. Needless to say, there's no niche content here at 5 a.m. Story Talk, and there never will be. Niche, at least to me, implies a kind of reductive approach to life and art when both are deeply, inherently connected. You can't create by following a how-to manual alone. You also need to have a curiosity for art, for life, the existential mystery of what we describe as reality, right? Nurtured and challenged and provoked. Which is why I've come to accept that my target audience, my niche, if I have one, is you. Or at least I hope it's you. Intelligent, thoughtful people as confused by how we ended up where we are today as I am, but willing to lean into that glorious, terrifying messiness together, willing to keep asking questions about everything. Well, now that I've defined my brand as people, as creative and interesting and brilliant as I am, let's talk about screenwriting for a moment, which is a much more quantifiable subject. I'm working on this TV pilot script, which I mentioned up front. I mentioned it last time too, as I was struggling to sort of wade through the noise of life right now to write with the same speed I used to. Well, as it turns out, part of that struggle was I hadn't found the script's voice yet. In part, my characters' voices. You might also say the kind of vibe and energy I want to bring on the page. In hindsight, I think I was getting bogged down in a mix of world building up front and executing scenes I had conceived more than a year ago when I first pitched my take. There was a lack of creative inertia I couldn't push through as a result to break into the sprint clip I usually write at. If I don't sprint on the page, I worry something is wrong. It certainly feels wrong. After a week or so of muddling through this, I decided to jump forward in the pilot and start writing other scenes in Act 3 and 4 and 5. Just kind of have fun with them, even if they had to change after I went back to the first 5 or 6 pages. The good news is that fixed it. Almost immediately, my characters, which were previously servicing old ideas, probably trying to satisfy producer concerns too, they came to life in really surprising ways. Before I realized it, I'd written a third of the script before I'd even written the first act. I'm not sure why I hadn't tried this earlier, as it's a trick I've long used when writing fiction. I want my characters to tell me who they are more than I want to be telling them who they are. Up front, that can be harder to do because you're still looking for them. In later scenes, though, free of your expectations, they just kind of go for it on the page in these exciting ways that can shock you. Now, when I go back to write the first act, I'm going to do so with fully fleshed out characters. Does it mean I'll have to rewrite much of the rest of the script that follows this new first act? Of course it does. But most of writing is rewriting, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. I would have rewritten those later acts anyway, somewhere between 10 and 20 times before I even thought to share the script with my producers in any way. So there you go. A possible solution to your struggles with your first act or say opening scenes. Take a non-linear approach to the narrative for now. It's not right for every project, but sometimes it's what you need to break into that creative sprint that lets you know you're really on to something. In other news, I've seen some utterly brilliant films lately that you should check out too if you get a chance, starting with Paul Thomas Anderson's One Battle After Another. I'm always going on about how Hollywood won't make films that try to confront what's happening in the 21st century and in particular America. Well, this film does that, while also providing one of the most Hitchcockian set pieces I've seen in a very long time. That desert road finale, it's extraordinary, and you're going to want to study why it's so thrilling too. I also saw Sidewalk Stories, which I discovered thanks to my friend Justin Simeon, writer-director of Dear White People and the Hollywood Black documentary series. Upcoming guests on this podcast, by the way. Subscribe now so you don't miss out. Sidewalk Stories comes from writer-director Charles Lane and is one of those independent films that you've never heard of that will just make you angry after seeing it because, well, you've never heard of it, despite how brilliant it obviously is. A big reason for that is how American culture has been so effective at suppressing Black cinema over the decades. I'm going to drop a link to Sidewalk Stories in the show notes, by the way, so you can watch it for free. Lastly, I caught Grave of the Fireflies on Netflix. It's a Studio Ghibli animated film set in Japan during the last days and aftermath of World War II. Yeah, it's probably one of the most difficult films I've ever watched, up there with Schindler's List, Come and See, and similar. But maybe somehow, because it's animated, it might be worse? I don't know, but it's beautiful and heartbreaking in the worst, most shattering way, and will just lay you the hell out. It'll also make you wonder why we don't collectively scream more about children dying of malnutrition, whether in Gaza for the past year or Southern Africa or wherever it's happening today. Now, if you have any questions about what we talked about today, you should drop them into the comment sections on this article in Substack or the 5am Story Talk podcast account at Instagram. If you enjoyed this ep of Real Talk, make sure you subscribe if you haven't already as well. Paid subscriptions are available, which get you all kinds of bonus content. Check the show notes for more on that and links to anything else discussed in this episode. As for the next episode of 5am Real Talk, it's coming your way in 2 weeks. But first, 5am Story Talk will be back later this week with lawyer, author, and co-founder and chair of Digital Rights Watch, Lizzie O'Shea. Let's just call her a digital rights activist, a chat that will hopefully help us wrap our heads around what's happening to our rights online and what we can do to fight back for ourselves, our children, and our art. I'm going to leave you now with a quote. I regularly share these over the 5am Story Talk newsletter as a way to generate discussion about how different the creative process is for each of us. This quote I'm about to read to you is from legendary music producer Rick Rubin. Living life as an artist is a practice. You are either engaging in the practice or you're not. It makes no sense to say you're not good at it. It's like saying, I'm not good at being a monk. You are either living as a monk or you're not. We tend to think of the artist's work as the output, but the real work of the artist is a way of being in the world. There you go, sage advice from Rick Rubin, which you can find more of in his book, The Creative Act, A Way of Being. I highly recommend it. So, breakfast with a rock star, nights out at the movies with your friends, cracking your TV pilot through patience, and nonlinear experimentation, all part of the practice of being an artist, I think. Well, that's it for now. See you around, Story Talkers.